Hello and welcome aboard another episode of the Gallant Says podcast. I'm Paul Gallant. This podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud. You can even watch it all on YouTube. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button, click the like button, leave a rating, a review, 5-star, if you will. You can even leave a roast if you so choose. All the interaction. I love it all. We're the most interactive podcast on the internet. We're trying to get there at the very least. Some of y'all suck at that, but that's neither here nor there. On today's episode, Mike Meltser, my old co-host from Sports Radio 610, my good friend. We're going to talk about the Houston Texans hiring Lovie Smith. There's been some comments made about Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson that have a lot of you guys feeling a little bit too sensitive, and you guys knew this was a witch hunt. Now we're finally getting proof. It was a witch hunt. But before we get to all of that, I want to talk about the Super Bowl that's coming up this week. Let's go.
A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to say.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
You got f***ing grow up, mother. You kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
Today's episode might sound a little bit negative because I'm just so, with the Texans hiring Lovie Smith. So I'll start off by talking about who I'm rooting for in Super Bowl 56. This should not come as a surprise to anybody. I don't really like the Los Angeles Rams. In fact, I hate them. They annoy me for a variety of different reasons, but I'm not going to start off talking about why I'm rooting against the Rams. I'm going to tell you why I'm rooting for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's for two reasons in particular. The first one is because I like Joe Burrow a lot. In fact, I think I'm falling in love with Joe Burrow, and not just because of the cool factor that he brings to the table, the swag that he has off the field. It's because he reminds me of Tom Brady. I shouldn't say that. They're totally different in terms of their backgrounds. Joe Burrow won a Heisman Trophy. He won a national championship. He was the first overall pick. Tom Brady was splitting time at Michigan with Drew Henson. He was picked number 199. He was Drew Bledsoe's backup his first season. His second year, he only came in because Bledsoe got hurt. Also, Tom Brady has won 7 Super Bowls. He has been to 10 of them. Insert every single playoff record imaginable. It's there. Insert every quarterback statistic. It's there. But there is something about Joe Burrow that draws a lot of comparisons to Tom Brady. He seems to be able to really relate with his teammates in a way that I don't think many quarterbacks can do. I would even point to one, Russell Wilson, who we'll talk about a little bit later. There's something about him, and I don't know if it's just because he's a normal human being or something like that, but there is just something about him where you get the idea that everybody that plays with him wants to run through a wall for him. And you know what? After that game against the Tennessee Titans, where he got sacked officially 9 times, but technically 11 times with 2 that got called back, that guy's tough as shit. He gets up after every single hit. He doesn't complain. He doesn't bitch. He doesn't moan. He doesn't throw his offensive line under the bus like Russell Wilson has, like Peyton Manning has, like Patrick Mahomes even did once. A lot of quarterbacks do it. And you know what? Sometimes I get it when they're getting battered back there. And look, Joe Burrow is also only in his 2nd season in the league. But Burrow is the kind of guy that he's just going to continue to get up and get up and get up. And that's where the comparisons that I see that are actually accurate comparisons between Joe Burrow and Tom Brady can be made. They just keep getting up and keep doing what they were doing before, even after they screw up. Burrow, not a perfect player, makes the occasional mistake, holds the football too long from time to time, throws interceptions from time to time too, but he just gets up, shakes it off, and keeps coming at you. Like a Terminator. I'm not talking Robert Patrick's Terminator and Terminator 2. I mean, that would be the equivalent of Patrick Mahomes, just an absolute elite talent. Burrow's not that. Deceptively fast, like all whites, but doesn't have the strongest arm. He just keeps on getting up, and he keeps on coming after you. So that's the first reason I'm rooting for the Cincinnati Bengals. The second reason, when a team is saddled with a bad owner, it just sucks. Like, you can't do anything about it except for hope that the guy dies, which is kind of fucked up. Mike Brown is the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals. And he is a guy who I would imagine, just looking at his face as he accepted the Lamar Hunt Trophy as champions of the AFC, that wasn't thinking about his Bengals making it to a Super Bowl. I bet he was thinking about the cost of a flight to Los Angeles from Cincinnati to ship his entire team there, the cost of hotels in Cincinnati the week of a Super Bowl, all the costs that the Bengals would have to pay up during what I imagine will be a rather expensive week for them. That's, I think, the first thing that's coming to his mind. He is cheap, which just blows to have if you're a fan. You can't do anything about it. So when you do get these occasional moments where, despite bad ownership that gives your organization a black eye across the league, that prevents free agents from potentially thinking, you know what, I want to go play in Cincinnati. When you finally do get to a big game like this, I just feel happy for fans who have been fucked over for a while. Cincinnati Bengals fans, if you have been sticking with this team for the majority of its history, there have been very few happy moments. I would say like the entire 1990s, bad. Yeah, you got Corey Dillon for a little bit. He wanted out. Barry Sanders style. He goes to the New England Patriots. He wins the Super Bowl his first year there. Carson Palmer, he looks great. Tears his ACL in a playoff game against the Steelers. Chad Ochocinco was fun. Andy Dalton comes in. I mean, they're relevant, but you knew that they had a limit and that the best players that they could get were traditionally players getting second or third chances after run-ins with the law off the field. Like, that's the best kind of player you're going to get. Oh, Joe Mixon slugged somebody. Well, maybe he'll fall in the draft to us, even though he's probably the best running back in said draft. Like, that's what the Bengals always were. It was, hey, like, what scraps are going to fall from the table to us? Because we can't afford the nice food. And they're getting a moment like this. And those fans deserve that. So I'm rooting for the Bengals in this Super Bowl, and I am very curious to see how it goes, but I can't pick against Cincy. I think there's a toughness factor that comes with Joe Burrow that is going to see them holding up the Lombardi Trophy at the very end.
Here's to God and football and good friends living large in Texas.
I don't have friends. I got family.
Texas forever.
I'm not mad. I'm not shocked. I'm not really feeling much of anything about the Texans hiring Lovie Smith as their next head coach. But it does just make you think about their decision-making process and if they even have one. So, a year ago, it felt like the Texans were doing a test run with Josh McCown as the next potential head coach. Like Jack Easterby, before he brought Nick Caserio in, really liked him, thought, okay, this is someone promising that maybe we can bring on the staff in the near future. So McCown was always a possibility, but he's not the head coach of the Houston Texans, and it seemed like that's the guy that they actually wanted. So it makes you wonder, if Josh McCown's the guy that they seemingly wanted to hire, why weren't they able to close the deal? And what happened between Friday and Monday? Other than the Brian Flores lawsuit, which incriminates the Miami Dolphins, the New York Giants, the Denver Broncos, and the NFL in discrimination practices against Brian Flores, but also just the entire league as a whole against minority head coaches. This lawsuit highlights the Texans' treatment of David Culley, who was fired after a year. Got a very nice retirement severance package, but definitely was hired to do a job that there was no way he was going to succeed given the talent he had on the roster. I don't think he's ever going to be a good head coach. I didn't know who he was before he was hired. I don't mind that they moved on from him, like so many do, like so many are outraged about. And that's not me. But perhaps that little detail from Brian Flores made the Texans panic. Wow, we can't hire Josh McCown because he's unqualified. Qualifications, how much should they matter if you want to hire this person? And if you can't even independently make a decision for fear of backlash, scorn, then, I mean, you're never going to be able to do what's in your own best interests. Yeah, fans are pissed right now. Ticket sales are something you're thinking about. But it's not like Lovie Smith is bringing people back. Great. He made a Super Bowl with the Chicago Bears a million years ago. He is qualified. He has experience both at Illinois and with the Bears and with the Bucs. Great. Wonderful. Splendid. And he's also going to give you a little continuity. And honestly, not the end of the world that you have some continuity with the way that the season finished. You have Pep Hamilton staying on as offensive coordinator. It's not all bad here, but it just makes you wonder about the decision-making process. Did the Texans get essentially ghosted? Did Josh McCown read the room, see that there is potentially a lot of backlash that was going to come his way through no fault of his own if he gets hired and say, yeah, fuck this, I don't want it? Feels like that might be a possibility. Did the Texans just see the lawsuit and think to themselves, we got to find a way to make ourselves look like we're not racist and hire somebody who is qualified so that the NFL doesn't look bad? I don't know what the process was, but it just makes me continuously look like you are probably right now with quite the spotlight at one Jack Easterby. How many of you guys have found yourself inadvertently at a pyramid scheme meeting? I have. I was hanging out with some friends at an apartment complex, and in the common area, some folks told us, hey, you should come to our room. There's drinks. We're having a party. And I thought to myself, oh, yeah, maybe some girls here. There's free drinks, clearly. May as well pregame with some random folks before I end up going out to the bar. So we go inside. There's like cheese platters and charcuterie all over the place. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this would actually maybe be a longer stay than I was planning. But then all of a sudden, a bunch of people come into the room. The door closes and someone says, all right, guys, I got something to share with you. I had never seen a pyramid scheme presentation before, so I was patient, but my eyebrow was raised. And all of a sudden, I see all these pictures on a TV. It's like a slideshow with people holding these little banners that open up like this, and they're saying, you should be here. And I don't remember the details, but I remember that this group was very big into the idea that you could own your own BMW. BMW specifically. Again, not really sure about why they made some of the decisions that they did, but they said the people in our group end up making so much money that they end up buying BMWs. It's like our sort of thing. But then they explained how things worked. And basically, you have somebody above you who is going to give you a task. And if you, I guess, accumulate a certain number of underlings, then you get to a certain status. And after about 5 minutes, I was like, okay. So I'm looking at my friends over to my left. They're sitting on the couch, and I think they were uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do. They didn't want to be rude. So I just got up and left. My friends did not follow me. I thought that they would. I thought that that show of force would perhaps get them to follow me. And it took them about like 10 to 20 minutes to follow me out. And everyone had this like glazed look over their face afterwards. So I tell you this story to tell you this. You will find yourself in situations where people are clearly taking advantage of you, using you, perhaps even hypnotizing you. But eventually you're going to come to. Hopefully. All you can do right now with the Houston Texans is hope that Cal McNair eventually comes to with Jack Easterby. Because Easterby was the one that I'm guessing was pushing Josh McCown. I don't think Caserio was. Caserio would have likely been pushing a former Patriots head coach. Excuse me, not head coach. A former Patriots coach. right? I mean, that's generally the Patriots people. They all seem to see eye to eye. And even if things don't necessarily work out when they leave the nest, they like to bring their guys with them. See Bill O'Brien, Romeo Crennel. So when Mike Vrabel as well. So when these situations unfold in a way where a guy with no experience, with no ties to the Patriots is, brought in on like an internship a couple of years ago, and then is all of a sudden sort of foisted into the center of the conversation about who the next head coach is after they moved on from David Culley. It felt like they had already made a decision, but they're going to pull up out of said decision so quickly for reasons that are really difficult to comprehend. Who would be making that move? Do you really get the sense that it's Cal McNair that's operating the controls when it's that quick? He feels rather hands-off. He feels rather, everything he should be saying, I'll trust you, Jack. You keep on doing what you're doing. Whatever the relationship is that has led to that, I'm not going to hate on it, but it's troubling because it feels like one person and his words, he's got such a silver tongue that he can sort of, just like in the movie Inception, incept an idea into somebody's mind and they're just going to be okay with it. So now when you see this sudden breakage, the one positive that maybe comes out of it is that maybe, just maybe, Cal McNair says, wow, I almost made this decision that everyone would have been really angry at me for. And maybe I should have stuck to my guns and shown some sacks, shown some balls, and just gone with Josh McCown. But something made him pause, and this is my hope. My hope is that perhaps he is starting to realize that he is in that same kind of pyramid scheme meeting room that I was.
This happens all the time! All the time! Why?
I think most people who know me know that Russell Wilson gets under my skin from time to time. I'm annoyed by his legacy-obsessed individual nature. I am annoyed by his constant non-answers that feature him saying the reality is. The reality is that the reality is the reality. Oh, okay. I get tired of his extremely public vacations, whether he's hiring a photographer group to follow him around as if he is Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen. Sorry, you're not. You and Ciara are like D-list celebrities at best. Or it's during the off season when he is making noise during vacation by having people say for him, his agent, that he would be okay being traded to specific teams. Don't even try to tell me that wasn't him. It was. He's bringing up unprompted in a press conference when Bobby Wagner's future is a topic point, his own future. I don't know. I hope I'm still here. Well, you're in complete control over whether or not you're going to be here going forward. And put your name on things if you actually have something to say. Have some stones. A lot of things to know about Russell Wilson, but I do think that he is a damn good quarterback. I do think, though, that people are starting to change their mind on Russell Wilson after the last year and a half of football, even though he has had some stretches where he has looked like a possible MVP candidate, specifically early in the 2020 season. Ryan Clark is on ESPN's Get Up, and he had this to say, and it's got some Seahawks fans in a tizzy.
Russell Wilson is a very good football player. Russell Wilson is a really good quarterback. Russell Wilson's not a great quarterback. Russell Wilson is not an all-time great quarterback. He's never going to be in those conversations. And so we have to stop putting him in those in that world that any team that has Russell Wilson can win a Super Bowl.
Really good. Yes, we're in agreement there. Great. Russell Wilson has been great. Is Russell Wilson, what we've seen from him over the last year and a half, though, still in that realm? I don't know. He could definitely get back there. I think we're all in agreement there. He's not that old. But that last part, he's right, Ryan Clark. If you think otherwise, you're crazy. Russell Wilson is not an all-time great quarterback right now. There have been plenty of quarterbacks that have come and gone before him that I think are people that we would be a lot more willing to say, yeah, all-time great. Dan Marino's one of them. John Elway's one of them. Steve Young. These are those quarterbacks that are in that, yeah, they were really good during their day. Are they going to be remembered as the greatest quarterback of all time? No, but they're going to be thought of as some of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. Troy Aikman. Is he? That's where it starts to get a little bit dicey, but I mean, the guy has been and won 3 Super Bowls. Russell Wilson's been to 2, won 1, lost the other. Did he lose it all on his own? No. Quarterback records are weird because it's a team sport. But the first Super Bowl was definitely won by the Seattle Seahawks historic defense. The second, the defense played pretty well until the fourth quarter, but it's Russell Wilson throwing the interception on the 1-yard line. Whether that call should have been made or not, that's besides the point. Russell Wilson is the guy who essentially the statistics books, that was a weird way to say statistics. Statistic books are going to show like Russell Wilson threw an interception on the 1-yard line in that game. So we're talking about an all-time great. Some jabroni who's never watched Russell Wilson 30 years from now will be like, isn't he the guy who blew that Super Bowl? Acting like he knows what happened in that game. He didn't actually watch it probably, but that's just the way that things go. That's how things will be remembered and not remembered. We forget. And it doesn't take that long to forget. So Russell Wilson as an all-time great. I take offense when people say Drew Brees is an all-time great. Oh, but Paulie's got all those statistics. Who gives a shit about yards? Stop talking about yards. Who cares? Everyone's throwing for more and more passing yards every single season. Drew Brees played in a dome. Drew Brees also had a lot of success due to the fact that he was checking passes down to some awesome satellite backs for the majority of his career. So I factor that in, the dome, a couple of seasons where the team didn't finish above 500 as strikes against Drew Brees as an all-time great quarterback, which I think there can only be a select few. Great quarterback, sure, for his era. Yeah, absolutely. All-time great. Stop trying to lump him in with Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. Those two have lapped him by quite a long margin. But Drew Brees has a leg up, several legs up on Russ. Russ has had, I think, a damn good career. There is a case to be made that he will be a Hall of Famer at some point. He has the Super Bowl victory. But I think that this comparison that Ryan Clark made a little bit later on Get Up is not the worst one when it comes to the trajectory that Russell Wilson's career is currently on.
This is kind of like Big Ben's trajectory, but I think Big Ben was the better football player, where Big Ben wins too when the defense is great and when they have a run game and when you limit turnovers, and then when he gets the killer bees, this offense is high flying. He's one of the best players in the football game, and you don't win a championship.
So they never won a championship. He's right on that. Clark is also going to be biased towards Ben Roethlisberger, saying that Roethlisberger is better. I know we all hate hearing that Roethlisberger is better than Russell Wilson, but I mean, when I think about Ben Roethlisberger, I'm going to put him above Russell Wilson should Russell Wilson's career just end right now. As far as what he did, he's been to 3 Super Bowls. He's won 2. He has put up prolific numbers. Wilson will probably surpass a lot of those numbers eventually, but is it going to come with more success than Ben? Because Ben's not an all-time great either. Ben is a great quarterback of his era, and there's nothing wrong with being a great quarterback of his era. But that's all Russell Wilson is at this point in time, and I think there is definitely a chance that he is on the back slope with the way things are going. Is that what you say? The back swing? The back 9? Whatever. You get what I'm trying to say here. There's a chance that his play is deteriorating. It's been a year and a half where you have not looked at Russell Wilson with the same kind of fear, if you're another team, that you probably did during all of 2019 and the first half of 2020. So Ryan Clark concluded his thoughts on Get Up about Russell Wilson as such.
We have to stop including Russell Wilson in these talks that if Russell Wilson goes here, does this team win a Super Bowl? If Russell Wilson goes here, does this team win a Super Bowl? This isn't basketball, and frankly, Russell Wilson actually isn't that great. He isn't that much of a factor that changes who football teams are. And so now we're thinking to ourselves, is he an upgrade over the quarterback we have, and can he make us a better team? And that's not every team in the NFL.
But it's the majority of teams in the NFL. Don't get it twisted, Ryan. I mean, you add Russell Wilson to a lot of teams, they are going to be better. I would say probably outside of all but 8 quarterbacks that off the top of my head that I can't think of, like definitively he is going to be better than those guys. And I think that the work ethic that he puts in also is something that is really going to give him a leg up on, I would say, the majority of quarterbacks. I think he gives a shit. He annoys me, but I really do think that he, as far as work ethic goes, is one of the hardest workers that we've ever seen. He just likes to talk about it probably a little bit too much. But whatever the case, don't get mad at Ryan Clark for this opinion. It is not far-fetched. It is not being a hater. He is saying that Russell Wilson is not an all-time great, and right now he's correct. Miss y'all, Seattle. Hope y'all are doing well up there. And now, time for Mike Meltser. I mean, I don't think there's any better way to start off a conversation about the Texans hiring Lovie Smith as head coach without playing this. And oh boy, they love to play the "We Are Texans" card. Joining me right now on the Gallant Says podcast, my good friend Mike Meltser. Mike, what was your first reaction to? First off, last night, all of a sudden, Lovie Smith's name just resurrects as an actual candidate for the Texans head coaching gig, and today he gets it.
My first reaction was, this has to be some sort of compromise candidate, because while these were not like official finalists, the Texans' own Twitter account announced like last Wednesday that they completed conversations with Brian Flores, Jonathan Gannon, and Josh McCown. And all of a sudden, Lovie Smith pops up last minute with this Schefter Field Yates thing, which was obviously like, okay, they're going to hire Lovie Smith. And I'm going to say to you what I said on Mad Dog Sports Radio on Monday night, which was, if Brian Flores does not sue the NFL and 3 specific teams, I think Josh McCown's the coach, and I don't think Lovie's the coach. That's where I come down on it.
If that's the case, it's just so... It's a pussy move. I mean, if you're an organization and you have any sense of self, you can't be scared away from hiring the guy that you want to hire. I have no idea if Josh McCown's actually going to be good as a head coach. No one does, to be perfectly honest. He's never done it before. I think it's a very reasonable thing to say that he's going to have a very steep uphill climb, especially with what this roster currently is. But if you like him, hire him. And this lawsuit coming out at the point that it did, Mike, for them to backpedal out of it, it's either that or maybe it's Josh McCown reading the room and saying, you know what? Everyone's going to be mad at me if I take this job with no fault of my own. Sure. I'm just not going to do it.
Well, I also wonder, because there are 2 sides of it, right? Like, did they crumble under the maybe public / NFL league office pressure not to hire Josh? Or is the environment so kind of toxic and tense that if they hired McCown, would the reaction have been so vociferous that it almost like would have cut off his head coaching ability at the knees? I don't even know what that looked like, but I'm just throwing it out there. Like, would the reaction have been so angry and bad that it would have made things untenable for them moving forward?
That's the impression I get. But no matter what they did, and I said this on last week's episode of the Gallant Says podcast, that no matter what they do, they are going to be criticized for it. Rightfully so, given the way that they've operated over the last couple of years and the fact that they hired David Culley for just 1 year only to move on from him after 1 year, where even if you do have objections to his coaching acumen, I mean, what the hell was he supposed to do? You know? And honestly, with the way that they finished the season, I feel like there at the very least was a case to be made. Okay, bring him back. I personally wouldn't have, but I also personally wouldn't have hired him. And here we are doing something, Mike, that makes more sense a year ago than it does today. Hiring Lovie Smith as the head coach, maybe on some sort of interim basis, makes sense last year. Now it's, hey, guess what? This job is still not desirable to other coaching candidates, or it's you're doing things for the rationale of we want to make our public relations better, which is not possible with any hire that they were going to make.
Yes. And with that, you've kind of like used up maybe a coach hire that Nick Caserio had in his quiver. Like, I think a lot of people are wondering that if you're going to hire, first of all, if you fire David Culley to hire Lovie Smith, why fire David Culley to begin with?
Yeah.
And then if you hire Lovie Smith now, why didn't you just hire him a year plus ago?
Or Romeo Crennel, like we talked about before.
Yes. Now it's a more sort of awkward situation. And now, and I tweeted this on Monday, now I'm at a point, I consider myself sort of like an expert in figuring out like where a franchise is, like what the expectations are, like when are they supposed to be goodbye, because that's kind of what we do in sports talk, right? Now I'm at a point where Nick Caserio, Jack Easterby, Lovie Smith, I don't have a good sense, maybe you have a better sense of where the rebuild stands, when they're supposed to be good, when they're supposed to be competitive. Like, is Lovie Smith now the hire? Is Lovie Smith now like the hire by which Nick and Jack are judged by? Or is this another bridge coach, kind of like David Culley, just with a better resume?
He's 63 years old. It's hard to believe he's the long-term answer. I hate to be ageist, but
sure,
even if Lovie Smith has experience as a head coach, it's not like it was particularly impressive of late. Yeah, with the Bucks, 3 years. Now with the Bears, okay. I mean, they did. It
was a good run.
Yeah, they got to a Super Bowl, so cool. But that's a long time ago. Is he all of a sudden, after a couple of stints in the NFL, after a stint in college, going to be someone that you look at and say he can give us 8 years? Because I would say that's the optimistic look at how long a head coach gives you for a period of time. But I just don't look at Lovie Smith as that guy. I feel like interim, yes, great. But I would rather go with the guy that they seemingly liked in Josh McCown. Personally, I was intrigued by the idea of Pep Hamilton, though it never seems like he was really floated as anything more than an offensive coordinator. And that's at least the good news of today. But yeah, if we're looking at the actual timeline of a rebuild, Lovie Smith feels like another bridge as opposed to, hey, this is our guy going forward.
Because I know some fans have pointed this out, and people will kind of sell this line more moving forward that, well, look at what they had in 2021 compared to what they have now. They have arguably upgraded a head coach. They have maybe upgraded an offensive coordinator, although, you know, Pep Hamilton's stint with the Colts in Michigan was not without fault, certainly. But
no doubt.
You can make that argument that head coach, offensive coordinator, they upgraded. We'll see what they do with DC, and they have a lot of other assistant spots to fill. And I think with Lovie and with Pep and whoever they hire, like, it's not going to look like some horrific product. Like, they'll know what they're doing. But my bigger question is, like, what is the grand plan here? Because Nick Caserio spent 20 years toiling with the Patriots. I mean, not toiling, because he made good money. He was their number 2. Did Nick Caserio spend 20 years, Paul, to get his shot at being an NFL GM, expecting to hire David Culley and Lovie Smith as his first 2 head coach candidates? Did he expect that?
I don't think so. But then you get to the second part of that. Could they have hired anyone better than this? Is this the best that the organization could have done through no fault of Caserio?
Well, I think that to me is like a real mystery, because sometimes when a coaching search goes haywire, like let's say you're the Texans this weekend, you're like, all right, they're not going to hire Flores for whatever reason, maybe just the lawsuit. Who like I honestly, even when Flores was fired, like the people linked them immediately. I just didn't think they'd go in that direction. Lawsuit aside, McCown, those issues. Gannon, I'm not exactly sure what happened there, like what he wanted versus them. You could just restart the search. I mean, there are other candidates around the NFL. People want head coaching jobs. I had a friend text me who, this is one of those deals where with the Texans, like, you know, something is weird when I'm getting texts from people who don't talk about the Texans with me being like, hey, what the hell's going on? They're going to hire Lovie Smith. And I had a friend of mine who was like, why didn't they reach out to D'Amico Ryans? Like, that would have been perfect.
Oh, I mean, I was listening to In the Loop the other day, and I think Wade Smith had jumped on the show, and Wade Smith proposed it. And I was like, that makes so much fucking sense. I mean, You're talking about a guy who has roots here, who's coming off a great season with the 49ers defense and what they were able to do this year. I mean, everything he's, for an organization that is at best viewed as racially insensitive, outside. I mean, it's a black head coach that you're hiring. Like, there were so many positives to it. And I don't think they ever even considered him. Now, maybe it's because, of a past lawsuit or something like that. Maybe they're that sensitive to things of that nature. But you're right. And they are constantly like your stupid friend that you're constantly explaining. Hey,
yes.
Insert example. Oh, wow, Paul, why do you hang out with I'm trying not to throw any people I know under the bus. Why do you always hang out with Xander? He shows up drunk and pukes on everybody. And the last time I saw him, he was dry humping my fiance. I don't like it when you hang out with him. And you're like, well, I mean, you just don't get it. But I mean, you can't even explain him anymore. You're just like, all right, well, he's just in the group. And that's what the Texans are constantly. It's like, hey, I don't even know how to explain this. They're just here, and I happen to live here.
Yes. I feel like it's the weirdest situation I've ever seen in pro sports, like in my lifetime. It's the weirdest. Ever since the day they fired Brian Gaine, nothing makes sense. Like, nothing is in the realm of what a normal NFL team would do. Like, the day they fired Brian Gaine, and really you can go back to when they hired Jack Easterby a few months earlier in April 2019, like, that's when kind of the direction of the franchise changed. And like, on its face, you can look at this and say, okay, Lovie Smith is head coach. Okay, he's been successful before and he's established and he's a pro. And I would agree with those things, but it's like, what's the larger thing that you're trying to build here? Like, what is this exactly as far as long-term contention, rebuilding this thing?
We, as the Texans, could have taken a giant shit on the fans' porch by hiring Josh McCown. And instead we are crop dusting them with a toot by hiring Lovie Smith. Like, that's what it is. It's like, oh, you didn't want Josh McCown. Okay. We get it. Here's Lovie Smith.
Yes.
It's like, thanks, I guess.
I'm curious how they're going to sell this.
They can't.
Because I mean, I think that the fan base is probably fine with Lovie Smith, but they're not getting more people to buy season tickets because Lovie Smith is the head coach.
No, they're not.
And I just think about these two head coaching searches compared to the two before them for the Texans. And sometimes you get a guy who's top of the market, but it doesn't work out. But when you look at it, when they hired Gary Kubiak in 2006, Gary Kubiak was the offensive coordinator of a multiple-time Super Bowl champion. Yeah. He had turned down other jobs before he took the Texans one.
He was extremely qualified, and he's a local guy. Like, it was a home run hire at the, at least out of the chute. And, we can all go back and forth on what his tenure with the Texans was. But in 2011 and 2012, you can't deny how good the team finally ended up looking.
And then Bill O'Brien, even though things in his tenure ended terribly, Bill O'Brien at the time in 2013, coming out of that season. Yeah, he was the top candidate on the market. Now, just because you land the top candidate doesn't mean that he's going to be a good coach. But I think there's real value in having a franchise that is seen as stable, gives guys a long time. And now you contrast that with these last two searches where you end up with David Culley, who I didn't even know existed before they hired him last year. Like, I didn't even know he was a coach in the NFL.
I didn't either.
And then this Lovie Smith thing where they go through a process and you think like, okay, well, David Culley, that was a placeholder. It was a bridge. It was only a year. Fine. Now they're going to get their guy. Now it's like they pull Lovie Smith basically, rabbit out of the hat over a weekend when he wasn't one of the finalists. And it just feels like they have settled for, it sounds bad to say settle, but like,
no, they settled. You're right. I mean, look, there's one thing you're both unstable and you're underwhelming people. I mean, the Jaguars are unstable, but last year they hired Urban Meyer. No matter what you think about Urban Meyer and what you saw of him last year, there's no doubt about his resume. None whatsoever. He was out of the game for a while, though, and they probably should have realized, okay, he's probably not going to have the same kind of passion that he used to. Then they hired Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning head coach.
Yep.
I mean, say what you will about Peterson, and I think he should have been able to get more out of Carson Wentz. But even if you're unstable, instable, whatever, you were able to get the sexiest hire possible. Is that because of Trevor Lawrence both times? Maybe. But you have now gone David Culley and an underwhelming retread coach that's already had 2 opportunities as a head coach in this league.
I think there's sort of famous saying about Bill Walsh when he was talking to some other coach, and he was like, there are 32 NFL teams, but when it comes to championships, you're only really competing with like a set amount of teams. And most teams you are not really competing with, like they're not legitimate contenders. I imagine for the teams in the AFC, I mean, you can try to justify this. And again, I want to emphasize, I don't think this is going to look awful on the field in 2022. It'll look normal. And they have a quarterback with some promise. We'll see how much in Davis Mills. But if I'm a team that's a real contender in the AFC, I am not looking at the Texans as any serious competition given their current state and given what this operation is. They are just one of like that giant muck of teams that's not really a threat to anybody to do anything harmful to anybody else.
I don't think they're a total disaster on the field, if that's any condolences.
They weren't this past year. I agree.
The down the stretch, I mean, considering the lack of talent, you would assume that, okay, they continue to actually build through the draft and have a first, a second round draft pick, that things could be at the very least slightly more promising, assuming that they actually are able to land some sort of young talent going into the season. But, going back to it, then you just have to wonder about something you were mentioning a little bit ago. Okay, Caserio comes in and his first 2 hires are David Culley and Lovie Smith. And I was of the hope, Mike, that the Texans were going to, once Caserio was in the building, look at Caserio, look at Jack Easterby and say, all right, Caserio's in charge here. Jack, you were steadying the course through the rough waters in the post-Bill O'Brien era. But now it's hard to feel like Easterby isn't attached to all of this because it started with Josh McCown. Is that really who Caserio was wanting as a head coach? I find that hard to believe. It seems like the Patriot guys stick with Patriot guys.
Yep.
And Lovie Smith feels like, they hired some sort of PR consultants at the very end this weekend after Brian Flores did it, or hired lawyers who don't know shit. And that this is the conclusion that they came to. And to me, that feels like a move that an owner would greenlight, but not somebody who actually knows what he is doing in football operations.
I also wonder, how much would it trouble you if they had to convince Lovie to take the job? Because I was told by somebody who I trust last year, and remember the timing of that, they hired David Culley, and then it's like, oh, by the way, Lovie's at NRG right now, and he's going to be your defensive coordinator, one of these kind of deals. Like, I heard last year, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, that Lovie didn't want to be the head coach of the team. That he was just like, hey, I've been a head coach. I just want to be a defensive coordinator, focus on defense. I think he actually did a pretty solid job. I was surprised. So what if they had to talk Lovie Smith into doing this? Does that bother you?
They gave him a 4-year contract for $22 million that has a 1-year out like they just did with Culley? It's funny how people were like, oh, poor David Culley. Like, I do think that, he looks bad, I guess, in the history books as someone who got hired. But, I mean, he got like a 4-year, $22 million retirement package. And some of the conflicting data that was coming out after he got fired, where at first I think it was an Aaron Wilson report, like, oh, wait, he's not getting paid anything? That sucks. I felt bad. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, no, this is just as expected. Like, most coaching contracts are guaranteed. And I don't think he probably thought to himself, listen, worst comes to worst, I can retire after this is done. But I mean, money's not an issue. I guess I'm not the kind of person who's going to get mad if a team hires a head coach to a contract and then decides to cut the cord on the contract. Like, that's their own irresponsible spending. It's not like it's taking away from their budget. It's not like they're the Bengals or something like that. I don't know. I kind of went on a tangent here and I sort of lost where I was going with it. But ultimately, I think that, there's a good chance that they might be looking at this the same way that they looked at it with Culley, where they say, hey, 1 year and out. But
and now you're in a situation. Yeah. And I think, okay, so theoretically, the job should get more attractive as they have more picks. They're not going to be good this year. They wouldn't be good if Vince Lombardi was coaching them. We all know that. So they're going to have another high pick next year, plus whatever they get for Deshaun. Hopefully it's a bunch. We shall see. The job should be more attractive. But like, since you've gone through the O'Brien firing, the Culley firing, like, Are they going to be in a position in a year if they want to move off of Lovie Smith? Would that just look bad? And now they have to go through another year? Like, I just see some of the people who interact with me on Twitter, and they seem to be arguing like, well, they're going to like build up this roster and like get these players with good habits and all this. And I'm like, who does it this way? Like, teams hire coaches to do this so that they can coach the young players. Like, I don't know. Objectively, the job should get more attractive because I don't think the talent base could get any worse. And Caserio showed some promise with his initial draft, but it's like, it goes back to my confusion about the timeline. Like, where are we in the rebuild and what are the expectations? Is it get to the playoffs in 2023? Is it get to the playoffs in 2024? If that doesn't happen, who is accountable for that? Is it the whole organization? Is it just the coach? I don't know the answers to these questions.
I don't either. And it just hurts to see that some of the guys that you have decided to move on from, whether it's DJ Reader with the Bengals, it's Charles Omenihu with the San Francisco 49ers, are playing key roles on teams that are making deep runs in the playoffs. I mean, that to me, no matter what they do going forward, you can't help but look at that and say, oh yeah, they had him. Oh yeah, they had him. Well, you hope that you're able to find that guy, but the draft's a crapshoot. I think even if you're good at this shit, you're probably going to screw up just as much as you succeed. The last situation I covered in Seattle, like John Schneider had a lot of bad drafts in a row, and it feels like all of a sudden, hey, maybe they found some decent drafts over the last couple of years, but it's not going to get you back to where you were a long time ago, where you had in like 2012 and 2011, just miraculous drafts.
I am amused at, did you see that McClain had that tweet over the weekend about how the Texans had all these stars like Deshaun and JJ and DeAndre. Now basically all the stars are in the sky. And so I guess like John Grenard and Jacob Martin, I think Martin may have been first, but somebody in the audience will correct me. I'm sure if I'm wrong on this. They quote tweeted and they basically called McClain a sellout. And I'm like, all right, first of all, if you know John McClain, and I love John personally, some of his football opinions at times frustrate me. John's been the same guy on Twitter the whole damn time.
Pathetic.
Yeah, like he's always going to be critical of the team in that way. Like he's not selling out to anybody. He's just saying the truth. So some of these guys, I know this is kind of like a side, but like some of these players, and I get that it would not be a great experience to be on this team in this situation, but they got to be less sensitive when it comes to this social media. They should be off of social media like Kevin Porter is. Get off of it. Yes.
Right. Just get off it. There's no benefit to it. No one's going to say anything good about you. Sell out. These people aren't here to pump your tires. They're here to cover a team that's a fucking mess.
Yes.
It's not going to be bright, sunshiny or roses. Yeah, sellout's weird, but also things are changing now, and I think people are like way more sensitive about the way that they are covered these days because there's so much noise. I don't think people. I just don't think people know how to handle, constructive criticism or actual criticism anymore.
Did that happen in Seattle at all? By the way, out of curiosity,
what do you mean by that?
Did any players or any coaches like bristle at anything specific? I'm just kind of curious.
Jaron Reed blocked me on Twitter when I said he wasn't worth the contract that he signed. Well, I mean, he wasn't, and they tried to restructure it, and he, not particularly sharp as a human being, decided when they were restructuring his contract that he was like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. And then they cut him, and now he's playing for less money with the Kansas City Chiefs. So whatever. Fair. I don't think he puts in a lot of effort, and I think he's very indistinguishable from other defensive linemen on the field. I did say that. I mean, I'm not wrong.
Other than that, he's Aaron Donald.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's clearly how he views himself. And also, this is a guy who has checker passed off the field, just to do a little Google research. So yeah, real great human being there. But, I think that if you're on a team like this, what's happening. There's no point. And in fact, I feel okay about it. It's like, there's not a lot of eyeballs directed your way. You probably should feel pretty good. It's only coming locally.
I always go back to what JJ said after O'Brien got fired. And I know you weren't here, but I'm sure you've heard it. JJ Watt.
Grapevine.
Yeah. He was basically like, he was happy that because it was so toxic at the time between the fan base and the team. He was like, I'm glad that we can kind of like get back to, like a sense of like relief or decompression. And I think, and the problem is like, so now, okay, how much of that still exists? I do think there's a bunch of anger, but now it's morphed into this, like these wide swaths of apathy to where a thing that was impossible to imagine 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the team not being able to sell tickets is now like an accepted thing. And we'll see what it looks like in 2022 because it is still football in Houston. But like everybody saw those crowds last year, it's like the team doesn't exist nationally except for what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson. And, you know, Lovie Smith, God bless him, but like he's not going to bring more people into those stands.
No, I mean, the only way is if they go on some sort of miraculous and probable run and win games, or if Davis Mills, or I hope another quarterback who they bring onto the roster shows a little bit of flash excitement. But yeah, right now, I mean, who are you looking at and saying, whoa, look at this? I think that you're right in that there are some guys that they brought in where there's at least something there, but outside of, and his name is eluding me right now. Who is that tight end, that younger tight end that they brought in who seemed to be making flashes towards
Brevin Jordan?
Yeah. Outside of him, I'm like, I don't know where the excitement's coming from. I mean,
they have no, to me, when I look at this roster is that, you know, the
Brandon
Lions,
Cooks, check that. Brandon Cooks is a very good player. And
he's a good player. Yes.
And if they keep him, which does not seem like a certainty, that is, I guess, a guy who you could say, oh, he's good, but that's not star power.
Yes, they have no foundational players that you can build a team around moving forward. Now, I think they have some nice players, Grenard, Brevin Jordan, Nico Collins. Like they have some guys here and there, guys who played well last season, who Caserio brought in, they might re-sign. But like starting with this draft, they have to bring in some foundational football players just to build up where the roster is. I mean, you look at these other teams. Jacksonville has some foundational players headlined by Trevor Lawrence. You look at the Lions, they have foundational players, Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown. They have some talent. The Jets have some talent. The Giants have some talent. Carolina has talent. The Texans are like completely bereft of that. And that has to start with that number 3 pick overall in late April. And this is something I was thinking about, like no matter who they hired as coach, and I'm not down on Lovie. Like Lovie, okay, I'm sure I'll get myself to a point where it's like, okay, we'll see what this looks like. We'll see what it is. But
I'm not mad about it. Yeah, I feel like, okay, look, it could be worse. You could, if this was like Pat Shermer or some other one of those other like just bags of meat that keeps on being tossed from organization to organization, I would be like, okay. But I guess you could say Smith is that guy. I like that at the very least he was here last year. If you are going to decide to go with a kind of boring route, then you keep Pep Hamilton and you keep Lovie Smith. Okay, down the stretch, those two sides of the football, they weren't looking terrible. So, I mean, there's that.
The most important thing, aside from the coach hiring, is like, again, they could have hired anybody. They need to vastly upgrade the roster talent. And I know that coaches make your talent better, but they could have hired the best guy available, whether that's Nathaniel Hackett, Mike McDaniel, who the hell knows. If this roster doesn't get way better, none of this is going to matter. None of it's going to matter. They need to upgrade the talent. They need to desperately hit on those first and second round picks. I don't know that they're going to be like big game hunting in free agency, but it might be nice to land some guys who are like, 26, 27, who they can build on the next couple of years. So that's something that I shouldn't forget, even in my frustration with the whole situation, is that building up the talent is objectively more important than who the coach is right now, because the talent is such that like it wouldn't matter who coached this team if the talent doesn't get better.
Do you think, though, that they will be able to, just like with the head coaching search, where it's probably an uphill battle for them to get the bell of the ball, if you will, how many free agents are going to want to come here? I mean, outside looking in, it's a disaster. Even if you do find out behind the scenes, actually, it's not that bad. Blah, 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 blah. You could tell some sort of side story. Objectively, anyone who you tell that to is going to be like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you crazy? Like, look at this, look at that, look at this. And to me, that's frustrating because that means it's all draft. It's not free agency.
I would not like it if Caserio replicated his plan of last year, which is bring in a horde of guys on like 1-year contracts. I would like this free agency to be more targeted. I don't think they're bringing any big free agents. I think that's more of a 2023 or 2024 kind of thing. But, maybe go aggressively or assertively at a couple of guys and build it up to where you're not like turning over the roster to that extent again. Because I almost think if they do that, then if I was Lovie, I'd be like, well, this is the same thing as David Culley went through a year ago.
I have a question for you about Deshaun Watson, because that's after this is now done, that's the next big step, hopefully, this offseason. I don't know that he would say yes to this, which is a big wrench in everything, but maybe he would, just because of the fact that he is no longer a persona grata anywhere. He is a pariah in NFL circles. I would like the Texans to make the trade happen with the Jets. And as someone who is a fan of the Jets, I think you realize that that's definitely something the Jets would like, assuming that everything's clear on that front. I don't know how you feel about the way Wilson played down the stretch. I know he was playing better than he had been earlier in the year, Zach Wilson. But I look at what the Jets have now, and I feel like they have the most bang for your buck now. And I honestly think that's the most important thing for this team right now, is to get really good young talent now as much as they can, as opposed to sort of staggering over years, because I don't think you're going to be able to really bring people back if you're saying like, all right, we have a first round pick this year, we have a couple first round picks next year or something like that. I think you gotta get help now to show that this rebuild is not going to be as long a road as it looks right now.
It would surprise me a lot from the Jets standpoint. I think they're all in with Zach. Yeah, I think they're all in with Zach Wilson. I don't think he had a very good rookie season. That's pretty obvious when you look at the stats. I think there was some progress late in the season. He was a little bit more comfortable. I thought he made some plays. I thought the Tampa game was one where I was like, okay, he's making some nice throws. Everything looks pretty normal here. If it were me, like, I would do it if I were the Jets, but that would be like hey, Zach Wilson's a big part of that trade. Like, I'm not going to give you like 5 million first round picks. Like, I'm giving you Zach Wilson, who is the number 2 pick. And then I don't know what the Texans would like do with that. Like, would you take Zach Wilson over Davis Mills? I'm going to say yes, because I would. Yeah. You can't,
or at least have him compete.
Yeah, you can't ignore the evaluation. Like, the Jets were not the only team that was going to take Zach Wilson high last year. So I still think Carolina is the one that makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know what you think of Carolina, but everyone there's going to get fired. And by everybody, I mean Matt Rule, if they don't get better next season. And he played college football in the area. That division is... Tampa can be solid because they have such a talented roster, but you lose Brady, and that's obviously massive. The division is there for the taking. Like, I don't know why Deshaun would not want to play for the Panthers, considering how much better he would make them.
And he also, I think, would, compared to other places, be accepted a lot more than anywhere else. You know, because of that Clemson tie, you have that massive fan base that's right there. And I mean, if you're the Panthers right now, I think you're looking for anything that's going to bring a little more interest back in, because obviously the Cam Newton effect had a very short shelf life. I'm back. Okay. Oh, yes. No,
he's back.
Gone. So where do you think it's going to happen? Where do you think it's going to end up going? Because there's other situations. There's Philadelphia, which has a lot of ammunition, but I don't know that he necessarily wants to go there. There's obviously the whole Jalen Hurts situation. Does Philadelphia like him? There's the New York Giants. But John Mara obviously said publicly, no, we're not going to trade for Deshaun Watson. So that's one of the teams that has the most assets that's out of the picture. Who do you think is outside of Carolina is like a real possibility?
I think if he settles the cases, like, I'm curious about the timing of settling versus trade. Is it going to happen kind of simultaneously? Or is it going to be the settlement happens and all of a sudden it's like, the Texans will try to start a bidding war? In that case, I could see Denver. I could see Washington. Honestly, if I was Cleveland, like, would
think about it. Yes.
Really think about it. Obviously Philadelphia, the Saints. I don't know if that could work from a cap standpoint, because they always have a lot of hijinks going on there.
I mean, do you believe the
Steelers?
Yeah, the Steelers would be an interesting one.
The Steelers, yeah.
Yeah, I think he would definitely sign off on that one. I think everyone in Pittsburgh would sign off on that one. Given
they've gone through this kind of thing before.
Yeah. I don't think they have a problem with shady quarterbacks.
Yeah, but I'm just kind of like, I've gotten to the point where, like, I'm concerned enough from a Texans standpoint, like, are they actually going to get a lot of assets for Deshaun? And like, the longer you go, you're like, is this really going to happen? And because it's like, what if they get nothing? And like, how much does that set this rebuild back? God forbid. Right. So I'm curious, like, I'm kind of interested from a legal standpoint. There were some reports that, hey, there was a grand jury in January. Well, it's now February. There's nothing on a grand jury, which, by the way, should be a secret procedure anyway. So nothing has seemed to happen so far on the criminal front. I think these cases will get settled eventually, but there are 22 accuser plaintiffs, so you have to get everybody on board. Plus, that doesn't technically eliminate criminal liability because there are some women who came to the police who are not part of the lawsuits. So I am saying all that, Paul, to say, if the cases get settled and we find out about that in like late February in advance of free agency, then I would say, okay, well, open up the bidding. Carolina, who knows, Atlanta, but especially Denver, Washington, the New Orleans Saints, the Eagles, and where would Deshaun be willing to go? Or is he still stuck on the Miami thing?
Yeah. And I mean, I think Bomani Jones said it best on his podcast. As far as scandals go, this would rank pretty low in Miami. I mean, Jesus Christ. The guy who was the lawyer for Quinton Dunbar, the former Seahawks cornerback, like that guy is dropping money of bags that are on camera. Yes. And he's running for, I think it was mayor of Miami Beach. And he said, I'm not corrupt. And then like 2 days later, corruption charges. And he like withdraws his name and he's disbarred. I mean, that's just like a 1 day kind of day in Miami. I'm curious to see what'll happen. There's part of me, Mike, I kind of want to, there's a part of me that wants them to just say, nah, we're just not going to trade you. Yeah, like you play for us or you don't play for anybody.
No, I would like that, but I think we've reached the point with athletes where I feel like if they did that, these athletes would basically like sabotage the team. Even someone like Deshaun, like I think they would like fake injuries. Like I hate to say it, and I could be wrong in saying that, but I think that's kind of where we are on it. That you can do that, like what Daryl Morey has done with Ben Simmons, but eventually, like I just don't buy. Like remember when Daryl was on 97.5 The Fanatic, and he's like, "Listen, if this thing takes 3 years or 4 years, we're gonna hang on to Ben Simmons." Like I love Daryl, but they're not hanging on to Ben fucking Simmons for 3 years. That's not going to happen.
It's probably not going to happen, but I mean, it should happen. Like the guy signed the extension, I know,
but like it's not going to go on that long. It's just not realistic.
I would feel you're right in that there will come a point where they're like sick of it. But when you're this bad, I mean, what do you really have to lose? Especially when you go back to what you're saying a little bit before. There is a chance you don't get the assets that you think you're going to get for Deshaun Watson. There's a chance that it's like DeAndre Hopkins kind of return, which would be a disaster, but smart on any team that's negotiating with you. Like, why would you put a lot of chips in the middle of the table?
And then you wonder, though, I feel like if there's this rift that's irreparable between Cal McNair and Deshaun Watson,
probably.
And especially if, let's just say Janice McNair was like, I don't want this guy on my team, then there's going to be some sort of end limit. And I think Casario's role in this is, hey, we're paying you so much money so that we don't get fleeced like we did for DeAndre Hopkins. And that's your role, to execute this trade and get as much as possible. And by the way, I was thinking about this conversation, like, not to get all morbid on you, but when you think about Nick Casario's obituary, so far, and we'll see how this works out, it's like hire David Culley, hire Lovie Smith. This is the guy who's going to trade Deshaun Watson. And listen, I don't know what other people think. People seem to think that like Deshaun's going to like not play well. I expect him to play great. What if he wins a Super Bowl at the next place? Like that's all in your obituary. First couple of lines. New York Times.
I got nothing
2060.
I got nothing more. I'm John Feinstein, and that's Nick Casario's obituary.
Yeah, exactly.
CBS Sports Radio. Yeah, God. I'm just saying. More to add to that. No, you should be saying that. And then Jack Easterby somehow survives.
Yes.
I don't get it. I mean, so I made this comparison earlier in the podcast. We've all been duped at some point in our life into, or someone attempted to dupe us into going to some sort of meeting that turns out to be like a Ponzi scheme meeting, right?
Yes.
Eventually, it's a Ponzi scheme and you leave. I remember there was a time where my friends and I in Houston, we were in an apartment. There was a bunch of people out in the lobby. They said, hey, we're having a party. You should come on in. We came on in. We sat down. We had some beers. And then all of a sudden the presentation starts and they put up on a TV. And after 5 minutes, I was like, I just walked out and left. My friends stayed for an extra 25 minutes.
What were they trying to sell?
It was like this thing where you can get a used BMW if you tell people that they can pay you so that you can travel anywhere. And it was like, it was just so ridiculous. I was like, I was looking at my friends. I was like, this is stupid, right? You know, and I didn't want to be rude and like text. So eventually I figured that this would send the message. I was like, I just got up and walked out. And I walked out. Okay. If you're Cal McNair, at some point you got to look at this guy and say, he's manipulating me. He's trying to manipulate me, right? At some point you got to be like, oh, he is willing to do anything to survive. Because that's the impression I get on the outside looking in. And at some point he's going to wake up. He has to. Unless he's a total idiot, like, you know, like it's just everything that's done by him. It feels like it is done in a way where he knows exactly how to make you think the way that he thinks. But you are a different human being than this person.
Like a sociopath.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. At some point you should wake up. And I'm just hoping that it happens because it just feels to me like that's clearly what this is. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's one guy who has just roped him into the lengthiest timeshare meeting of all time.
I can't disagree. I think that the difference in this dynamic is it's so personal because of the faith, the religious faith they share. And I also think there's this dynamic. See, like your scenario is a good one. It's like, hey, there's a Ponzi scheme. At what point do you realize, like, before you walk into that party, you have no connection with those people. No. And the only thing that's kind of tethering you there is like the feeling of social obligation.
Good point.
Whereas here it's like, there's obviously some sort of deep connection somehow between Cal and Jack. And then there's this unfortunate dynamic where the more he's criticized, the more there's this martyr thing going on where I think they think, oh, okay, he's criticized, like that makes us more right in what we're doing.
We need to double down.
And then there's this tendency where I'm sure if you like exist in any professional sports organization, there are going to be criticisms of somebody who's polarizing, but they're going to look at those stories, SI articles, sports radio, whatever. And they're going to say, well, there are a couple of things in here that are like not really true or blatantly false. And so they'll latch onto those things and say, well, this reflects like an overall mischaracterization of Jack Easterby. So I think that's the problem of the dynamic that we're having. I remember when people were concerned that he was going to be the GM after O'Brien got fired and he was the interim. And I was like, there's no chance that Jack would ever be the GM because someone like him, GMs have a record, who they hire as coach, who they fire, who they draft. Jack Easterby is never the kind of guy who wants an actual track record that's supported by wins and losses on his resume, because then he's inherently accountable for the results. But in the vice president of player operations role in charge of culture, you can kind of like manipulate and little finger and Rasputin your way to a lot of years of employment before it kind of catches up to you, is my sense.
And that is what he has done. It's just hard to not look at Easterby right now as opposed to Lovie Smith. And I wish we could just look at Lovie Smith, but all I can think of is either Texans PR or some third party said, you know what, this Brian Flores thing, you can't hire who you really want to hire. So you got to hire somebody else and watch them hire Josh McCown next year. And they'll watch us be right back fucking here. Good
and
God.
By the way, I feel like the people who work in Texans PR deserve like Houston Medals of Honor. Those people, Omar, all those guys, they have the hardest jobs in this city.
I don't know what you do.
The hardest jobs in the city.
I mean, it's Sunday night. You're like, all right, well, we're getting ready for the Josh McCown press release. And I'm so like, wait a second, guys. You got to make this all glamorous, okay?
Yes.
Just a little sparkle, little sprinkles on this. Lovie Smith. Make it happen.
I feel like a big selling point will be the beard.
He does look like Black Santa Claus. That at the very least makes him look charming, you know, as opposed to with David Culley looked very grandfatherly too. I mean, what can I say?
He did, yes.
David Culley looked like a really nice guy. Apparently, by all accounts, was a really nice guy. And it doesn't matter. Like, there's no selling this. You're just fucked. Like, why would you take this? Like, if you're Lovie Smith and you didn't want to be the head coach, they must have given him a lot of back. I mean, they must have paid a shit ton of money. And I just said, if they gave that much to Cully, I mean, good God, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how this, I mean, I don't know this factually. I'm not a reporter, but I think that he got talked into this because they needed a compromise candidate. Everything had happened. And I'm sure that they had to really sweeten the pot as far as the money. And I think that's why he ultimately took this job. Well, that's where we are at.
He is Mike Meltser. You can catch him on Mad Dog Radio, and I'm sure we'll be doing this again pretty soon. Good grief.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm quoting Charlie Brown. I'll see you later.
Sounds good.
Again, a big thanks to Mike Meltser and to everybody who tuned into this Tuesday edition of the Gallant Says podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud. You can also subscribe on YouTube. You can like this video on YouTube. You can watch my face in all its glory on YouTube. Rate, review, tell a friend, all that jazz. I really appreciate your support. I'm very excited about something that's going to take place a little bit later this week. Fill you in on the details of that when I can. Until then, so long, farewell, and you will hear me in another episode of the Gallant Says podcast on Friday.